Wow. How y'all doing today? Pretty good, I hope. I'm so excited and wow, this is what my voice sounds like. All right. Anybody, it's a little bit surprising, I guess. Anyway, y'all know me, I'm Melanie, and I'm here today to talk with us about the phenomenon of the unlucky choice. The choices that we can make in our app while we're developing it or designing it, and maybe those aren't the best choices, but we don't really realize it until it's too late. So I live in Chicago with my husband, Joseph, who's here today. Hi, honey. And our son, who is 13 and 5'11", and I really don't know how that happened. And our two cats, Atlas and Peabody, because Portal is our favorite video game. Our cats are pretty adorable. They do things like steal my desk chair when I get up to get a cup of tea, or both try to sit in the same box, fall asleep on the book I'm trying to read, or force me to buy a bigger desk because they want to sit between my keyboard and my monitor. I'm a disabled, decorated military veteran. I served in the US Navy as an intelligence analyst. It sounds cool. It was basically like rooms with no windows, that kind of stuff. I am a senior software engineer. I work at LinkedIn, and I'm an accessibility subject matter expert there. I'm a core team member. I'm also a judge for CSS Design Awards, and I do check the accessibility of every website because I consider that to be an important part of the design. And I organize Ember Camp Chicago. We typically hold it in the fall right before we come here for Emberfest, so stay on the lookout for that for next year. I became a web developer because I wanted to remove some of the frustration from the world. I remember the feeling in 1997 when I wrote my first lines of HTML, how excited I was to see something render on the page. That was so exciting. Oh my God. It was like a whole new world for me. As a teenager, it was like amazing. I remember feeling so excited when I could style things with CSS, and I don't know if y'all remember CSS Zen Garden, but it was basically like the same page, and you could have like these different themes, and it was the same information, and it looked different each time, and that was so exciting. And I remember the Great Depression when I started to learn JavaScript, and then the subsequent relief when it started working. But when I looked around me, I saw people being frustrated with software in their everyday lives. So they're just trying to check their bank balance or pay their bill online or just do their jobs. Like so much of our job involves interacting with software on a day-to-day basis. But the software wasn't very good and they were frustrated. And I just thought, I could design really great software and I could code it, and then there would be less frustration in the world. And maybe they'd be happier at work. And when they're happier at work, they'd leave work even happier because you're leaving work. Of course you're happy. And then on the way home, they wouldn't have so much road rage and they wouldn't honk the horn so much and the world would be quieter, which would, oh my God, be amazing. And then when they got home, they wouldn't like get in a fight or kick the dog, or maybe they'd recycle and maybe we could solve global warming and it would be amazing, and all because of really great software. Well, okay, so it's not really how it works, but you get the idea. But the reality, the state of web development, the state of software application development is very different. Right? You can have two front-end engineers and they can have absolutely nothing in common. Sometimes we joke there's a front end of the front end and there's a back end of the front end. And I think that this is partly because JavaScript engineers have taken over the space and businesses have thought, well, it's more efficient, and they basically do the same thing, right? So we're in this strange twilight zone where there's always a new thing that's supposed to solve all of our problems, only it doesn't really. It kind of has the same amount of problems as the last one did. We just don't know it yet until we're already into our third or fourth rewrite. And Ember has this backwards compatibility guarantee That means we'll introduce new features, we won't break the old ones. We have all this stability that we work really hard to get in there. I think this kind of stability shouldn't be the exception. I think it should be the rule. I think that we are 20, 30 years into the web. Our jobs, putting things on the front end, putting things on the web, our jobs should be really boring. But somehow we have discovered all these ways to reinvent the wheel 25,000 times. And 20 years ago, we had to figure all this out. 10 years ago, we were getting JavaScript frameworks that helped us ship faster and ship more efficiently. And today our job should be super boring. I don't think we've figured out yet, or we haven't fully grasped the idea that, oh, we figured this out already. And today, too many front-end developers spend time learning how to hack things together, and they end up learning anti-patterns as a result. But the developers never really come to understand that the thing they learned how to hack together and make work is an anti-pattern, because to them it's just the pattern. That's just the way you do it. And if it builds, it works, right? If it builds, it's good, right? No, the answer is no. But they use that knowledge to build add-ons and libraries and really useful things, and they're productive, and they get praised for them. They even get promotions for them. And all of a sudden, you're a senior software engineer, and oh, cool, nice paycheck. But ultimately, they're not useful because they're not accessible. And there is this really intense moment, I think, for the senior software engineer who has done all this work to get to this place, and all of a sudden, this accessibility expert is saying, this is useless. You're discriminating. You don't care. Why don't you care? And that feels bad. Why don't I care? What? I'm just doing my job. And all of a sudden, you're talking to me about whether or not I care, whether or not I care about disability as a civil right, like the ability to access the internet. That feels bad. I mean, I'm thinking about all of the knowledge it's taken, all of the time, and ask my husband, all the tears it's taken for me to get right here, right now. And in that, for someone to come tell me, oh, here's a very important thing you didn't know about your job, that feels terrible. So then, senior software engineer who feels bad starts to perpetuate this myth. Well, accessibility must be hard because I know JavaScript. And if I know JavaScript and I don't know accessibility, then accessibility must be like super hard. And I think that this is problematic at a large scale because I think that it feeds into this cycle of faux innovation. They become the engineers who are the driving force of what we think of as innovation, but they're not really helping us innovate anything new, but giving us things we already had. Now, think about AMP. Make your site faster. Well, and publishers love it because they can still monetize and pull in all this stuff, and somehow they're in the top of the search results, and oh, their sites are faster, and oh, they're getting more money again. Or the new form API that Google gave us, and because styling form input elements is hard, right? But are they really giving us innovation, or are they repackaging what we already had? Thing is, semantic HTML already resolves so many of the issues that the JavaScript-based innovations attempt to solve or resolve. And I think too many JavaScript engineers brush off HTML. Oh, I just don't know it that well. Oh, I'll just use a div, it's fine. And I don't think it should be this way. The idea that we're willing to rewrite what's already available in HTML simply to make it more like JavaScript baffles my mind. I can't grok it really. Write a transpiler at least. That was a joke. But maybe the way to interrupt all of this, and maybe the way to get us to stop and think, is to look at some of these choices and to think about it at an individual level. Because one of the ways that change happens, how does change happen? With each and every one of us. making a choice in a moment. That is how we change. So first, we're going to go talk about the designers, because that's fun. I think a lot of times folks mix up art and web design. Art is up to the interpretation of the artist or the viewer. It can be very emotional and very personal, and we can talk about it for hours and hours and hours and never agree on it and all still be right. Design, though, design for the web, it's different because it can affect the usability of the thing. It can affect who gets to use our app and who doesn't. And obviously, I care about aesthetics. Hopefully my designs or my slides show that I at least care a little bit. But the design unlucky choices that we can make can really hurt the usability of our application. Let's say gray on light gray, or as I like to call it, when muted tones attack, made popular by unsubscribed links everywhere. At least in America, muted interior design is kind of a once you've made it, once you don't have to just pick your furniture up from secondhand shops. You can go get an interior designer, plan out your living room, and I mean my living room is like shades of gray anyway, like this. So I was actually shopping for a couch when I found this picture. And it can make a room feel bigger and lighter, and it's lovely. But it's not appropriate for the web. I was in a paint store looking at paint colors for the walls, and they had over 100 shades of white, gray, and beige. And you can barely tell the difference between all of these colors, but for some reason it's very important to have this many shades of light gray, white, and beige. And this ended up invading our product design thinking. And the web became unreadable. We got white on light gray text. We got gray on lighter gray text. And all of these things were beautiful to us because they were in our homes. Oh, it makes me feel at home. Yeah, okay. And then the big companies who were known for beautiful design told us that this was beautiful web design. They presented them at big splashy events, and suddenly gray and space gray and gray on lighter gray all became the colors we wanted to use. So we copied them. And this was our unlucky choice. We copied the big company because it felt easy to make that choice, because surely they had done their user research with billions of dollars that they have. Surely they wouldn't lead us wrong. Surely they were the innovators. Surely they were the ones who knew. So it was a safe bet to copy them. But it wasn't. It was an unlucky choice. So what can we do about this in our own products? Two things. We can incorporate color contrast checkers into every step of your process. Every step. Designers should have color contrast checkers. There's plugins for whatever your designers use. There's a plugin for that, I promise. Developers, all of you in this room have access to that. Chrome has built it into Chrome DevTools already. Ember A11y testing gives that to you as well. So there's zero excuse. And it's 2019 and color contrast is a solved problem. So, it's really solved with science and math. It's super solved. We don't have to worry about it anymore, ever. And add this information to your style guide. The documentation is so incredibly important, because how many of you have tried to just go into a meeting? I don't know, maybe you can do it. I have a harder time. I like to crack jokes and, she's not serious enough and all that kind of stuff. But if I go in with documentation, looks like printed words on a page wins. So if we put in our documentation, we can have those conversations with our designers. We can have those conversations with our product owners. We can have those conversations with anyone we need to. It's in our documentation. Refer to the documentation. And the documentation can save us in some of these issues. Some real talk, though. We absolutely must be willing to have these conversations. I promise you that every single accessibility professional in your life is tired of talking to you about color contrast issues. Super tired. And it is not any one person's responsibility, it's each and every one of our responsibility. And I mean that in an encouraging, non-judgmental way. Every person in this room can have that conversation. You can take time to think about how to phrase it. You can take time to gather some documentation, to gather some proof to back you up if you need to, but have this conversation because it's essential. And I would really like to never have to talk about it ever again. It'd be awesome. Another way that we chase aesthetics, I think, is in form controls, especially radio button. A really good friend of mine, Eric Bailey, who also talks about accessibility, dove into this a little bit in one of his talks, and I think it was interesting enough that I'd like to talk about it in mine. So a new feature request comes in. We'd like a new option added to our super awesome form. And they'd like radio buttons, but they don't want those ugly radio buttons, the one that in the browser that you can't style and it's super frustrating. Oh my God, why haven't they changed that yet? And can you ship it today? And you're the Ninja Rockstar Unicorn. So you start thinking about radio buttons like default radio button and what does it look like when it's selected and what does it look like when it's disabled? And you're thinking about state flow and all this. And then they say, can you ship it yesterday? Oh, okay. Maybe you swear a little bit. I don't know. I do. And then they say, oh, and here's an example of one that we found on the internet. Right? So in that moment, you think, oh, I'll just find one that already exists to save some time. And Space Cat thinks that's a great idea. So we stop thinking about radio buttons and we start thinking about how we could ship it yesterday, and we look for a library or somebody that already has radio buttons that we could use that look great. And there, we've made a choice. And so we go hunting and we find something online that's made by a big tech company and it looks nice and they have tons of components and it seems to work, so it must be good enough. Maybe it will even be great. But in that moment, you've made a really unlucky choice. Because when you look at the amount of markup that some of these big tech companies use for their radio buttons, this is one radio button, by the way, all this markup. The rendered out look looks pixel perfect. The cake is a lie, pixel perfect is a lie. Remember that, just put that in your head for later. You'll need it. So we decided to use it. And then we ended up with 6 HTML elements, 9 attributes, 66 CSS selectors, and 30K of minified JS for a radio button. Now, turns out, if you have a form with a lot of these radio buttons, and then you try to use that with a screen reader, you'll actually crash the screen reader because the screen reader is only able to handle like so many DOM elements at a time. And you've just given it way too much for one radio button. And all of this is really just, it's too much for a radio button. But how are we going to do it? Because for real talk, they are kind of ugly. But we have semantic HTML to the rescue. So we're going to try doing it the way, okay, so we're going to put the thing in first, the way it should be done, and then we're going to see if we can layer some presentation on top of that. Can we get the best of both worlds here? So we use a field set and a legend, and we maybe wrap it with something that will hold things together nicely and give us some styling hooks. The CSS we already have will save us, for real. You can see here, this is not your normal bog standard radio button look. It also looks pretty great. And it also is completely semantic. My friend Scott O'Hara wrote about this and showed some of these amazing designs. And you can see if you visit this CodePen link later, I'll give the link to the slide after show with all the links. And you can get what you need without all the ridiculous devitis. So some real talk. I think it's really important that we focus more on bridging the gulf that exists between accessibility and design and development. So I don't think we can just give the pattern. I think that we have to give the anti-pattern too. So to help with that, I have started a project. It's in its baby infant stages, so please don't actually me too hard on it just yet. It's called Ember Component Patterns. And what I've started to do is write down how do we need to think about this from a UI and a UX perspective? And then how does that translate into markup? And then how does that translate into an Ember component? And then how can we abstract that for reuse in Ember? Because I think we really do need to talk about it. I think that we can't just give direction on what to do. We also have to give direction on what not to do. And I think that's really, I don't know why it took me 20 years to figure it out, but after 20 years, I have decided this is one of our problems. So I hope that we will all, I'm going to share this more in the coming months as we fill it out, and if anybody wants to help with this project, I'm completely open to it. We really want to have some good standard patterns to share with the Ember community. We have seen the benefits from going farther and faster together by aligning on certain things, and I definitely think and believe and know that this is one place where we can align. So we talked about a couple of the unlucky choices we can make when we're chasing aesthetics. Let's talk about a few of the unlucky choices we can make when we develop with a little bit less care than perhaps is wise, or lost in web space. First one is missing landmarks. So I'd like to explain this by asking you to imagine that you've walked into a grocery store. Now, I can only talk about the grocery stores in the US because up until yesterday, I've only been into grocery stores in the US. They're very lovely grocery stores here, by the way. They're a little chaotic, but okay. In the US, our grocery stores, or at least the one we usually go to, they're very organized, and above each of the aisles is kind of a sign that says, here's the things that are in this aisle. Cereal, and that's aisle 5, and paper plates and napkins, and that's aisle 24. And, but imagine you've walked into a grocery store, and none of those signs are there. And you kind of feel lost because now you have to go up and down every single aisle to find the stuff that's on your list. And maybe you only have a short list of 5 things, or maybe there's only one thing you're trying to find, but now you've got to go through 30 aisles just to find the one thing you're looking for. That would suck, wouldn't it? Kind of. That's how it feels for a user with assistive technology, like a screen reader, when you don't put your code in landmark regions. When we fail to wrap the header content with the header tag, and the main content and the main tag, and the nav tag, the footer, we're leaving out these markers. We're leaving out the signs above the aisles that say, here's where the thing you're looking for is. So assistive technology allows you to pull up a little shortcut menu that it will overlay when you open your screen reader, and it will allow you to skip from the header to the main, to the footer, to the aside. And it's super helpful and super useful. And otherwise, it just takes forever to get through all of that. So let's look at this page with nothing on it. We see it doesn't have any semantic HTML either, but we'll get to that in a minute. But this page will read to me with a screen reader all the information that's there. I will hear page title. I will hear link, open an account, link, services offered. I will hear that there's a search. I will hear this information. But I'm not able to quickly navigate to any part of it. So by comparison, this bit of code I've added in the landmarks. We have the header that contains the page title now. We have the navigation element that contains the links to other pages and the site search. We have the primary content contained in the main element, and we have the copyright information in the footer. So we've just given users with assistive technology a much better way to navigate through our code. And we've given ourselves an easier way to test our code. We've put stuff in the places where it goes. But what about the code contained in those landmarks? It's missing semantic HTML, which will give our content more meaning. So let's go back to our grocery store analogy. So the grocery store now has signs above the aisle, because we put the landmark navigations in. We can see aisle 5, cereal. Okay, we know to go there for cereal. But when we go there for that cereal, all the boxes are white. None of them have labels on them. We'd have to open up every single box of cereal to see if it's our Cocoa Puffs or Cheerios or whatever we want to eat for breakfast. Weetabix, I think, is another one. That's kind of gross and unhygienic and messy and takes a lot of time, right? So that's kind of what we have here. We have our landmarks, but we don't have any semantic HTML, so we don't know what we're finding. Now, we've added some semantic HTML. We've got some lists. We've got labels on our inputs. We've got an H2. We've got paragraphs. We know where everything is, and we know what everything is. And again, this also makes our code easier to write tests for. So it's not just a bonus for screen readers. Oh, and this is better crafted code, because this is the code that when the people sat down to write HTML spec, this is what they meant for us to do. They didn't mean for us to put everything in a div. And I understand the div is very useful and it's very necessary, etc. But this is the intent. So by elevating our craft, and I'm not saying caring enough, by focusing enough on our craft, we can elevate our code to look something more like this. And it's useful across the board. And I think it's really, really awesome that JavaScript is so prevalent on the web. I know it might not seem like that I feel that way all the time, but it's true. I think it's amazing because it's this incredibly powerful tool that has brought this. Only certain people used to get to do this kind of stuff, and now anybody can do this stuff. I have a degree in psychology. I used to be an intelligence analyst, and I taught myself how to code. Anyone can go to a boot camp and learn how to write code. You can team up with a buddy or a partner, and you can learn how to write code together. You can get a computer science degree and learn how to write code. All of a sudden, everyone is empowered to create for the web, and that is absolutely incredible. But I think that there is an effect that's caused by new developers who are trying to use the div element rather than standard semantic HTML. And I've been told, oh, just use the div, Grandma, it's the way of the future. But it's not old school. It's necessary. And hopefully, I've just convinced you that it's necessary to put things in semantic HTML where they belong. As a developer, you must be willing to write semantic HTML. As tech leads, we must be willing to provide that feedback on each PR. Oh, you didn't use the right markup here. Let's work on it together. We can say it in nice ways too, y'all. We don't have to be jerks about it. I can help you. Let's work on it together. And as leaders, when you're the boss, insist that the developers in your shop produce well-crafted code. The thing is, I think it still goes deeper than chasing aesthetics or marking up code because we are super clever. There are 10 ways to do, at least 10 ways to do any single thing in JavaScript, and we haven't yet come together to make the choice that even though we could do it 10 different ways, we're going to pick this one or these two ways. I think that there are a lot more interesting problems to be solved, but I think that we are slowing ourselves down by continually reinventing the wheel and figuring out all the different ways it could work. I think we see the custom components as a great way to see the results of all the cleverness. I think I love Ember. No, I don't think I love Ember. I do love Ember. I think we have the best component story out there, especially with Octane. At first, I was like, oh, why are we doing this? But now I'm just like, oh, I really love it, actually. And I adore custom components. I love like crafting something together and feeling smart when it all works finally. And it's great. But I think we get tripped up with them because we haven't realized that parts of the component development process should be super boring. We reinvent the wheel each time, and they're still awesome because they give us functionality that we wouldn't otherwise have in our application. But a lot of times we're so focused on the clever part. Oh my God, look at this cool thing I did. And then it's an add-on. But then we forget stuff like keyboard navigation. And we could have gotten that from semantic HTML elements. Like there's keyboard navigation already built in for a button. It's probably the most famous element accessibility engineers talk about because it's seriously just use a button. Stop using divs and calling them buttons. You get that you can press it with the space bar and it works already. You don't have to add any keyboard navigation to it. So what do? We have to remember some things. If it can be done with a mouse, it has to also be able to be done with a keyboard. I think my moment of clarity was the choice to spend a day not using a mouse and only using my keyboard. And it gave me this whole new level of empathy. And it was also a little bit depressing because it just showed me how really fucked up the web is right now. And then don't add your own custom keyboard shortcuts because screen readers already have a bunch. And don't conflict with them if you're going to do that. So you can go online and you can look up screen reader keyboard shortcuts. And there's this nice handy list that someone's already put together for you. And just make sure, like, look through that before you do your own. And focus needs to go back to the place where it came from. Escape needs to close drop-downs. I should be able to push the escape key when a drop-down is open and it should close it. So if you're going to do a custom component, try that on your own when you get back to it. Don't try it right now. When you get back to your desk. When that modal closes, the thing that triggered the modal open, focus needs to return to that thing. So the person who's only using a keyboard isn't lost. And I think another way where our cleverness gets in the way is with ARIA Live, or like I like to call it center of the universe. Because sometimes when you spend weeks and weeks working on this one single part of the big company's application, it can feel like the center of the universe. It can feel like the most important thing because you had all these meetings, you've had pages and pages of specs, you've had to like 3 fights with Steve about the way it should be done, and then the designer is really just not happy because you didn't do drop shadows or rounded corners or flat design, whatever. There's like a million things. So of course it must be important because it took all this work. And then somebody says something like, well, what about all the async data that needs to load? And the Ninja Rockstar Unicorn speaks up and says, let's just use ARIA Live attribute. And then the user with the screen reader will be alerted to the fact that more data has been loaded and is available. And it's tempting. And everyone's relieved because, oh, phew, we can just keep going. Someone gave us an N answer. But that moment where everyone was just relieved and, oh, phew, we can just use ARIA Live, that's a very unlucky choice. Because if everything is important, then nothing is. And because ARIA Live is really irritating. So there's a few guidelines for deciding whether or not to use ARIA Live. Is the special thing that you're creating, is it counting down to catastrophic doom? Does your user need to be updated every time the count goes down a little bit? Do they need to know the doom is coming? Is there a very important alert, like you're going to time out or you made an error and the form can't submit? If the answer is no to either one of those questions, avoid it. Alternatively, if you're really determined to use it, make everyone on your team read all of the information about ARIA Live. This will have one of two results. Either nobody wants to read that much documentation, and they will skip it and decide not to use ARIA Live, which they really should do in the first place, or they will read all the documentation because they are convinced that it's the only way to use it, and then they have a better chance of using it properly. I know, it's very smart, right? See, clever. Anyway, while you're thinking about catastrophic doom, which will likely lead to contemplating our role, our space in the universe and the cosmos and how we're insignificant and all that, think about this. Let's distract ourselves from that part. No existential crisis today, please. Think about this instead. Accessibility experts, accessibility engineers like myself, we're trying to innovate. Right now, we can only test in an automated fashion for about 20 to maybe 30% of the accessibility success criteria. That means there's like 70 to 80% that we can't test for yet, and that's all manual. There's a lot of work to be done in that space, but we keep having to stop and talk about why we need to use a button instead of a div, why we shouldn't use ARIA Live, why we need color contrast. And I think that while we are having these conversations, we only have so much time in a day, right? So this other innovation that we're trying to get to, we know needs to happen. We have some ideas about how it should happen. That has to wait because we're still back here. So I wanted to encourage us all to let's try to move forward a bit. One of my new side projects, I got this idea from some of the other core team members, is a command line, choose your own adventure style screen reader for JavaScript engineers. So you could test the accessibility, you could test the screen reader experience of your code from your command line tool. That would probably be a bit easier than getting a Windows machine, setting up Firefox and NVDA on it, or buying JAWS, which is a really expensive license. Also would be really fun because text adventures are really fun. I don't know, I think they're fun. So I'm still dealing with modals that don't trap focus, or designers who think that accessibility cramps their creative style. Stop it. Just stop it. It's 2019. There are laws now, and if you live in a country where there aren't accessibility laws, don't worry, we're getting there. There will be laws. We have figured out that this is the way forward for the human race. It is coming. It is here. It cannot and will not be ignored. So guess what? Let's just do it. Thing is, we always have a choice. And I've only touched on a few of these things because it's almost lunchtime, and lunchtime is awesome. I've only touched on the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the unlucky choices that we can make in our applications that will haunt us down the line. But by remembering that we will always have some level of choice somewhere. Maybe we don't get to pick the design. We do have a choice about what words we say to the designer to get them to think about this. We do have some type of choice somewhere in everything we do. By remembering that, we can genuinely craft experiences and be more inclusive in our design and development. I really encourage every single one of you to think about creating the space for deep thinking to occur. Don't just hit the deadline and start the next project. Take a day or two to think about it. Make space and time for conversation to occur, for deep thinking to occur. Because that's how we improve our product, that's how we learn and grow. And all of this might just seem like it's just code, but it's really humans doing the code, so it's humans, it's a human problem. And this is how we can create long-lasting value. And I think every single one of us is interested in creating long-lasting value. So if you enjoyed this talk, or you have a well actually that just can't wait, please find me on Twitter or any of these other places. And thank you very much.